interesting sidelight. I don't know if you guys heard about this. Of course, the Angels were really pissed at Jagger and Richards and the Stones, and they held them responsible for bad-mouthing them and the whole scene that went down. So they put a hit out on Jagger, actually. And the very next year, they tried... Jagger was hanging out on Long Island in one of the mansions or something that he was renting, and they tried to take him by sea. They came in a rowboat, about 3 or 4 Angels. Luckily, there was really inclement weather, and they got bowled up. You know, they were armed and all the rest, going in. They wanted to go through his back door, you know, through his harbor entrance, and the storm capsized them. Otherwise, we may not have had Mick Jagger around anymore. But he was terrified, you know, for a year, and right after that, you know, the rock and roll community, well, after the Manson thing, they all started arming themselves, especially the Stones.
All right, listen, Mike. Go ahead, Mike, and then I'll move on. You have a final comment?
I was just going to say, wow, that's great. I didn't know any of that stuff. That's really interesting to hear some of those backstories about that. You know, yeah, very cool.
But you know, it's so ironic because for the Stones, you know, murdering people and all that kind of stuff. Well, that's show business. You know, that's mascara and show business. But you know, when reality hits, it's a whole different deal. You know, I mean, they the Midnight Rambler and all their really dark stuff. You know, but when it comes to nitty gritty, you know.
Yeah, that was a very dark, bizarre scene. You watched that footage. Oh man, it is very creepy. All right,
yeah,
very
Jagger
good.
said, I think the only people who didn't have fun there were the guy who got killed and me. You know.
Oh man, Mike, thanks for your call.
Hey, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. 866-482-1011. 866-482-1011. Any questions about Hendrix, Morrison, Janis Joplin, Lennon, Elvis, Cobain, and Jerry Garcia? One more thing on the Grateful Dead. We just finished Woodstock, and I know a lot of people are just sick of talking about Woodstock. I am too, because we started early in the summer. But from what I understand, their performance was so poor that they didn't even put it on the record. What was going on at that point? What was the problem?
Well, everybody was tanked on this bad brown check acid, and including, I guess it was in the water coolers backstage, and everybody was helping themselves, which is kind of ironic for the Dead, because they specialized in dosing people, you know, so they got dosed and they got a little taste of their own medicine. And in any case, you know, though they were veterans playing on acid, I think they said they played on acid for virtually every performance until like 73 or 74. So anyway, this was bad acid, and Garcia said we were plumb atrocious, and he saw blue balls of lightning, you know, flashing across the stage and onto his guitar. Also, it was raining like crazy. Everybody, especially the guitarists, were incredibly paranoid about being electrocuted. Yeah, so they weren't up to par that night, and frankly, neither was Janis, and neither were I mean, let's put it this way: all of them were very dissatisfied with their performances.
Yeah, I heard Hendrix didn't like his, you know, the Star Spangled Banner and all that. He wasn't satisfied, or
no, he wasn't. And of course, well, I mean, he didn't come on until Monday morning. He was the headliner. He was supposed to be the climax for Sunday night, and by the time he played, you know, there were 400,000 to 500,000 there. He only had 30,000 in front of him. A rain-soaked, muddy crowd, you know. He was on bad acid, and his girlfriend was back in a tent with him, having him suck lemons and trying to talk him down. She said he was sweating bullets for various reasons. You know, he was just starting with a new band. He thought they were under-rehearsed. He was paranoid about Jeffries. He was being cornered by the Black Panthers then. A lot of stuff was going on in his life that was pretty bad. And you know, you got to keep in mind that these two people only had a year to live. You know, they were not in. You know, Monterey was their launch 2 years before. This is much later.
Yeah, that's very. You know, I don't know much about Janis Joplin, but the image I have is her with a bottle, and I'm sure drugs. Yeah. So we're going to move. Not yet. We're going to take a call here, but we're also going to talk about. I want to find out a little bit about her, because Woodstock. You know, that was just amazing, almost an accident, some of the information that I've learned. And the bands that wanted to play there didn't get to play. A lot of bands were asked to play there, and they refused, and they regret it to this day. Yeah. All right, let's go. Let's take a call here. Let's go to Heath. He's on line 1. Heath, good to have you on.
Hey, Alan, man, I love your topics on Friday, man. It makes a good ending for the week. And David, I wanted to ask you if you have any personal stories in the book about, just regular Joe folks partying with the dead rockers. And I'll take my answer off the air if that's okay.
You mean like, okay. Bye-bye.
Yeah,
Jim Morrison, the seances for Jim Morrison's casket?
Morrison would, when he wasn't on stage, he'd basically disappear for days or weeks on end on these marathon benders. And, of course, he was getting drunk with everybody and anybody, and he'd wake up either in a ditch somewhere or in somebody else's bed, and he had no idea who they were. So he was definitely into partying with pretty much anybody. Hendrix was that way too. I mean, he couldn't say no to anybody. If somebody wanted to party with him, that was cool, So back then, certainly these stars were not hardly as unapproachable as they are now.
That's probably true. And I think most celebrities, most rock stars, when they get to a certain point, it's out of their control. They can't handle it anymore because they have so many fans. They have to, get somebody to control it. But in the beginning, they love their fans. Of course they do. Like, now, let's talk a little bit about the caller brought up one interesting thing about some people not believing that these people have died in the first place. And wasn't there some bizarre story about Jim Morrison's?
There is about Jim Morrison, that he faked his death and all the rest. I just obviously I don't think there's any merit to that at all. But
when we come back, I want you to touch on that. Also, I want to talk a little bit about Janis Joplin, but you can explain that strange odyssey of his casket. Anyway, 866-482-1011. One more segment, and continue with your calls and your tweets, and we'll get them out. It's David Comfort, rock and roll historian. It's the Rock and Roll Book of the Dead, The Fatal Journeys of Rock 7 Immortals, and the website rockandrollbookofthedead.com. It's the Rock and Roll Book of the Dead. We're talking to rock and roll historian who spent 10 years putting this together, The Fatal Journeys of Rock 7 Immortals, Elvis, Janis Joplin, Cobain, Hendrix, Morrison, Garcia, Lennon. This came out before we lost, Michael. The thing about Michael Jackson, I think that's similar to this, is drugs are involved, a childhood trauma, lots of problems. And you didn't write about Michael Jackson, but there's a lot of similarities. And early on the show, we kind of talked about that. Before we go back to the calls, you want to just briefly, because we only got a few minutes, talk about Michael Jackson and the connection to this.
Well, in terms of childhood, similar to many of the other childhoods, it's very strange that a lot of these people were alienated or actually actively hated their father, and they adored their mother. Similar with Michael Jackson. But anyway, the other big similarity, of course, he's a hypersensitive, intense guy, just like all the rest of them. Mm-hmm. So what might not traumatize or bother somebody else does him. And in the end, he went a step beyond anybody else. Everybody else, it's like the chemotherapy for superstars is heroin, because it's what makes you feel like you're in a womb and you have absolutely no cares. You forget who you are. You forget all the pressures. Well, he went a step beyond that. He went to propofol, which is an anesthesia. Essentially, he wanted to be in a coma. This induces a coma, not just sleep.
There's no pleasant feeling there. There's no, a lot of these other...
No, it's not.
These rock stars go there for a high.
Like the others, it's strange with the others, too. Most of them were insomniacs, and most of them had horrendous nightmares, and so did Michael Jackson. He wanted a dreamless sleep, because when he dreamt, it was just as bad. He wanted to be completely out. So in a sense, it was a temporary suicide for the night, and he just got a little more than he usually did. And I think at the very end, frankly, he wanted to die. I think this we hear about death by cop. Well, I think this was a death by doctor. I think he wanted to be taken out.
That's interesting. Yeah, you would think, he had this great new tour that was supposedly going to be the big one.
Terrified. He was terrified about that. He was certain he couldn't do it. He was in horrendously bad health. His lungs were bad. He could hardly